Everybody, you're listening to WRSU-FM in New Brunswick, our 1975 Christmas special, and now the news.
This is the WRSU Christmas Eve report. I'm Economopoulos. The mournful wail of air raid sirens echoed throughout Bethlehem and all of Israel today, even as thousands of pilgrims streamed toward the birthplace of Jesus Christ. Hundreds of combat-ready Israeli soldiers lined the streets and rooftops of the village to underscore the tightest security measures taken since Israel captured Bethlehem in the 1967 war. The air raid sirens were turned off as a practice alert. The pilgrims are there to honor Christ. The soldiers are there to prevent guerrilla attacks. Christmas Eve in Beirut is reported to be a nightmare of bombings, kidnappings, and street killings as Christians and Muslims continue bloody warfare against each other. The last of more than 1 million Holy Year pilgrims filed into St. Peter's Basilica today before Pope Paul closed the Holy Door for the next 25 years. Tens of thousands of persons gathered for the ceremonies ending the 1975 Holy War. President Ford today formally entered the New Hampshire presidential primary, his first official challenge to Ronald Reagan in the 1976 campaign. Documents were filed on behalf of Ford by Congressman James Cleveland. The New Hampshire Republican said it would be misinterpreted if Ford did not run in the primary election February 24th. The Soviet Union today denied charges by American leaders that Soviet involvement in Angola is a threat to détente. Without mentioning names, the government newspaper Izvestia attacked Western circles who, it said, misinterpret Soviet motives toward the war-torn African nation. Both President Ford and Secretary of State Kissinger have called on the Soviet Union to stop supporting pro-Moscow forces in Angola. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger's pledges American firmness in its dealing with the United Nations and accuses the General Assembly of contemplating irresponsibility in several heated disputes. Kissinger spoke today at swearing-in ceremonies of Samuel Lewis as Assistant Secretary of State for International Organizations Affairs. Boston's Logan International Airport was closed for 2.5 hours this morning following an accident in which no one was hurt. A twin-engine plane's landing gear caved in when the Beechcraft was taxiing down the runway after landing. The plane was carrying freight. The Federal Reserve Board today took action to help spur economic growth. The Fed eased reserve requirements for member banks to free an estimated $340 million for loans. The increased supply of loanable money should help reduce interest rates. There will be at least a short delay in postal rate increases scheduled to go into effect Sunday. The Postal Service says it will ask an appeals court Monday to allow an immediate 3-cent increase in the first-class stamp price, which was to have jumped from 10 to 13 cents before the increase was blocked in a technicality. The condition of an FBI informant who was kidnapped, shot, and tortured in an apparent warning by criminals last week has not improved. 30-year-old John Whalen is under guard at a hospital in Mount Clemens, Michigan, and authorities say Whelan's torturers wanted to know what he told the grand jury about a fencing ring. Florida officials say sheriff's deputies and Marine patrolmen arrested 11 persons and seized nearly 5 tons of marijuana in 2 raids today. One of the drug busts took place south of St. Augustine, and the other raid was in the Florida Keys. When it was all over, 4 24-foot cabin cruisers, 4 trucks, and 4 trailers had been seized. Algerian authorities indicate that 3 of the 6 terrorists who seized oil ministers in Vienna earlier this week were European and Latin American extremists who backed Palestinians in the Middle East. Questionings of the attackers in Algeria show that 2 were Palestinians, 1 Lebanese, 2 Europeans, and 1 a Venezuelan. Intelligence agent Richard Welch, murdered in Athens by gunmen yesterday, was defended by outgoing CIA Director William Colby today as a dedicated American. Welch was officially listed as a diplomat with the U.S. Embassy in Athens. Colby criticized as paranoid those who revealed his identity as CIA man. Greek authorities have stepped up security for U.S. Embassy officials following the shooting death. Welch was assigned to the embassy and as its first secretary monitored all CIA activities in Greece. An organization calling itself the Union of Officers Struggling for the National Idea has claimed responsibility for the murder and has pledged more incidents. I'll be back with some sports, the weather, and a Christmas story right after this message. It's... I could get high and fly on my wheel just to see how it feels. Fly in a car with my friends with a beer in my hand. Can you feel how it feels? Fly. I can drive and I'm alive, and my friends all enjoying the ride. In the car with my friends with a beer in our hands. You can feel how it feels. Fly. We can drive, we're alive.
We've got a 1056 here. Looks pretty bad. 7 kids, 2 of them still trapped in the vehicle. Requesting ambulance and emergency service unit.
Drinking and driving is the #1 killer of young Americans. Think about who's been drinking and who's going to drive. Friends, don't let friends drive drunk.
Stand by, please, Central.
A public service message on behalf of the U.S. Department of Transportation.
Central, better notify the coroner's office. We've got at least 2 for them.
On the sports scene tonight, Buffalo Braves center Bob McAdoo, the NBA's leading scorer the past 2 seasons, has been suspended indefinitely by the Braves. McAdoo complained of back pains and refused to play in tonight's game against the Boston Celtics. Braves owner Ball Snyder said today McAdoo was examined by the team doctor and x-rays were negative, but the superstar refused to see a second doctor. In an interview with a Buffalo television station, McAdoo said he would be willing to discuss the situation with the Braves after the holidays, but said the issue did not involve contract difficulties. Buffalo owner Ralph Wilson has apologized to Minnesota running back Chuck Foreman for the snowball incident last weekend. Foreman was struck in the right eye by an icy snowball thrown from the stands. NFL Commissioner Pete Rozelle has fined Buffalo owner Ralph Wilson and Los Angeles owner Carol Rosenblum $5,000 each for criticizing the league officials. Just hasn't been Buffalo's day, I guess. It sounds like something out of the fertile mind of Stan Freberg or maybe Sam Spade, but it's for real. The private detective sits slouched in his dingy Los Angeles office. Cigarette butts litter the ashtray. The telephone rings. A high-pitched voice is heard on the other end. Only then does our man answer. Good morning. North Pole, Santa Claus speaking. The Nick Harris private detective agency is legit, as they like to say. It's been open for almost 70 years, has 172 investigators, and takes pride in its work, especially around Christmas. It seems the agency's telephone number is just one digit away from that of a charitable agency that used to take Santa Claus calls. And instead of telling small children that they dialed the wrong number, the Nick Harris private detective agency simply answers the calls. The charitable group no longer takes the calls, but the telephone number apparently is passed around from child to child, and the calls keep coming. Director-in-Chief Milo Spiriglio has nine of his investigators on his Santa Claus detail, including a guy who does Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and a female operator who plays Mrs. Claus. Says Spiriglio, we never promise them anything, we just say Santa will do his best, and he notes, we get a big kick out of it. It's kind of different work for us. Much of the nation can look forward to a cold and, in some cases, a white Christmas. The mercury dropped to 26 degrees below zero in upstate New York, and there was a lot of snow in the Pacific Northwest, where the road to Paradise, Washington, was closed by snowslides. But for our area, here's the forecast. Fair tonight, mostly cloudy tomorrow, and some rain possible tomorrow night. It's 11 degrees in New Brunswick, so bundle up. That's the news for this hour. Our next report will be at 10 p.m. And now back to Steve Grafrida and his friends.
Jingle bell, jingle bell, jingle bell rock. Jingle bells swing and jingle bells ring. Snowing and blowing up bushels of fun.
This is WRSU-FM in New Brunswick, New Jersey's alternative station.
Good evening. This is the WRSU Christmas Eve report. I'm Economopoulos. The shepherds watching their flocks in the hills of Judea have been replaced by soldiers watching for possible terrorist attacks on pilgrims to Bethlehem. Soldiers in combat gear lined the route from Jerusalem to Bethlehem today as thousands of tourists visited the birthplace of the Prince of Peace. The Latin patriarch led hundreds of marching schoolboys from the ancient walls city of Jerusalem to the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem. He was accompanied by at least 3 Israeli Secret Service agents as a precaution against possible terrorist attack. Services in St. Catherine's Church, next to the site where tradition says Christ was born, ended with midnight mass. Thousands of tourists from around the world attended services and milled in the streets of Bethlehem as troops patrolled the Judean hills. Under colored lights and streamers, vendors hawked everything from roasted chestnuts to wooden souvenir camels. Pope Paul today proclaimed Christ the beginning and end of all things and closed the holy door of St. Peter's Basilica, ending a holy year that brought more than 8 million pilgrims to Rome. An estimated 100,000 persons gathered in near-freezing weather in St. Peter's Square as the Pope emerged from the Basilica's porch after shutting the heavy bronze door that will remain shut until the year 2000. Vatican Radio said 4 telecommunications satellites beamed the candlelit Christmas Eve ceremony live to a potential audience of 330 million in 40 countries. In his Christmas message, the Pope predicted the holy year would bring a new surge of fraternal love. Last-minute travelers in the United States moved steadily through major airports and some Amtrak terminals this Christmas Eve, relieved of the pressures of last week's United Airlines strike. Traffic thinned on city streets with offices closed early or the entire day. The National Safety Council estimated that despite calls for careful driving, between 440 and 500 persons would die in traffic accidents in a long weekend, beginning at 6 this evening and extending to midnight Sunday. The weather forecast called for a cold Christmas over much of the nation, but not necessarily a white one. A weakening storm belted northwest Texas and northwest Oklahoma with up to half a foot of snow. In West Texas, 7 persons were killed when a trailer truck collided with a car on a fog-shrouded highway. In upstate New York, the official lowest temperature was 26 degrees below zero in the early morning hours at Saranac Lake, and there was an unofficial report of 32 below in the Black River Valley area. I'll have a Central Jersey forecast a little later, but I can't promise you snow. The first family spent Christmas Eve doing what's natural in a town like Vail, Colorado, skiing and shopping. President Ford spent 3 hours on the ski slopes under sunny skies, wearing a bright blue ski outfit slashed with red and white and red stripes and white stars. Ford said the skiing had been wonderful. Ford told reporters he will spend Christmas Day, in his words, skiing and opening presents and having a good time. Betty Ford did some last-minute shopping today. She said that this is one of her most favorite times of the year because the Ford family is together. She also said that she has made a New Year's resolution not to be so overly candid in the future, but she said, after all these years, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. President Ford today asked his Labor Secretary not to resign in protest over his veto of the controversial common-size picketing bill, which John Dunlop strongly supported. Dunlop, who worked with Congress to get a bill acceptable to the administration, told reporters he will not decide for another 2 weeks whether to resign. The legislation would have allowed a union to shut down an entire construction site during a dispute with only one subcontractor. Ford also formally entered the New Hampshire primary today, the nation's first test of his voting strength against GOP challenger Ronald Reagan. The former California governor's aides are predicting victory in the February 24th election. Greek authorities are closely guarding American diplomats in the aftermath of the murder of a U.S. Embassy attaché in Athens. The dead man, Richard Welch, was identified as the CIA's top operative in Greece. An organization calling itself the Union of Officers Struggling for the National Idea claims responsibility for the killing. The 46-year-old Welch was gunned down as he returned from a Christmas party last night. The mystery group that assassinated Welch warned it will be heard from again. The publishing last month of Welch's CIA connection in an English-language Athens newspaper was regarded by intelligence sources as the cause of his murder. One source said bitterly the disclosures made Welch a marked man. 18 persons were killed near Sydney, Australia, when a pre-dawn Christmas Day fire swept through a hotel. Authorities say 26 persons were injured in the blaze, some of them seriously. A fire official says the fire was thought to have started in the elevator shaft on the ground floor of a 4-story building. It spread so quickly it blocked off escape routes for about 80 hotel guests. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger had some disparaging words about the United Nations today. Kissinger said, quoted here, "The recent session of the Assembly has shown to us all its complexities and aspirations for progress, and in many respects, its contemptible irresponsibility." Kissinger said the United States is willing to overlook momentary overheated disputes in the interest of the UN's long-range usefulness. Kissinger made the comment at the swearing-in of Samuel Lewis as Assistant Secretary for International Organizations Affairs. Little Christmas cheer from the Commerce Department. Christmas Eve reports of the United States exported more than it imported for the 10th consecutive month in November, virtually assuring the nation of its largest annual trade surplus ever in 1975. The department says exports exceeded imports by more than $1 million last month and pushed the surplus to $10.6 billion from the first 11 months of the year. That compares with the disastrous deficit of nearly $2 million registered at the same time last year. A lot of bicentennial fever is building up around tomorrow's annual reenactment of George Washington's Christmas crossing of the Delaware. Officials at the historic site at Washington Crossing, New Jersey, are prepared to handle twice the number of people who normally view the event. Last year, the crossing attracted a crowd of 13,000. This year's crossing will include New Jersey Environmental Protection Commissioner David Barden, wearing full colonial garb, as one of 60 soldiers in 3 40-foot Durham boats. They will leave the old ferry inn into Washington Crossing Park in Pennsylvania mid-afternoon on Christmas Day, about 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. St. John Terrell, the Lambertville, New Jersey theater producer who started the tradition in 1952, will again play the part of Washington, who led 2,400 troops across the river in a snowstorm on December 25th, 1776. The motley force defeated Hessian troops in Trenton, marking a turning point of the American Revolution. I'll be back with more New Jersey news, a look at the sports and weather right after this message.
Benjamin H. keeps banging all winter for heat in his apartment, but it doesn't do much good. Ben is 78 and forced to live in a building that should be condemned. He needs our help. Estella G. needs our help, too. The rest of her family was killed in a hurricane that flattened her town in Honduras. She now must work to rebuild her home and her life. Most of us have been treated by God more generously than that. In fact, most of America has been treated more generously during its first 200 years. When worshiping God, we should give our thanks. But that's not enough. We've got to bring God into our lives by working with those who need help. During America's 200th birthday, join with others at your local church or synagogue and make plans and sacrifices to help relieve suffering. You'll end up helping yourself as well. Welcome God to America's bicentennial. Practice what you pray. A public service of Religion and American Life, the Ad Council, and the station.
In New Jersey news, the State Transportation Department said today it will shortly begin construction of a $4.8 million extension to Interstate Highway 195 from Jackson Township in Ocean County to Howell Township. Transportation Commissioner Alan Sagner said his department would start accepting bids for the project on January 29th. Police said 2 persons were killed and at least 2 others were injured after 3 cars collided in Gloucester City this evening. Police said the collision occurred about 6:30 p.m. on the westbound lane of Interstate Highway 76 leading toward Philadelphia. The importer of food from India was ordered today not to distribute $60,000 worth of contaminated food products stored in 3 warehouses in Hoboken. U.S. District Court Judge Herbert Stern ordered the famous Overseas Incorporated to remedy unsanitary conditions. The company, which specializes in importing, manufacturing, and distributing specialty foods from India, earns about $500,000 a year. Mrs. Laura Wissam celebrated her 104th birthday today, blowing out candles on her birthday cake and sharing the cake and punch with more than 100 well-wishers. For Mrs. Wissam, born on her family farm in nearby Jamesburg on Christmas Eve, it was her 5th birthday party at the John Montgomery home in Freehold. There's no action in professional sports this evening, so we have no scores to give you, but this is what's happening on the sports scene. Buffalo Braves center Bob McAdoo, the National Basketball Association's leading scorer for the past 2 seasons, has been suspended indefinitely by the Braves. McAdoo complained of back pains and refused to play in last night's game against the Boston Celtics. Braves owner Paul Snyder said today McAdoo was examined by the team doctor and x-rays were negative, but the superstar refused to see a second doctor. In an interview, McAdoo said he would be willing to discuss the situation with the Braves after the holidays, but said the issue did not involve contract difficulties. The European Boxing Union says it will not allow Belgium's Jean-Pierre Kaufman to fight heavyweight champion Muhammad Ali. One boxing spokesman said the Belgian heavyweight was not even good enough to spar with Ali, and the union didn't want him to get killed. Oklahoma coach Barry Switzer has suspended Horace Ivory, the Sooners' second leading ground gainer, apparently because of an altercation with an assistant coach. Turning now to the weather, the current temperature reading in New Brunswick is 15 degrees. The barometer reads 30.64 inches and steady. The winds are out of the west, northwest. The weather forecast for the central New Jersey area calls for clear and very cold tonight, temperatures ranging from 0 to 10 degrees. Tomorrow, increasing cloudiness, high in the 20s. Friday's outlook calls for snow developing and changing to sleet and rain. We can also expect some rain late on Sunday. Again, the temperature in New Brunswick is 15 degrees, so bundle up. It's cold out there. This has been the WRSU Christmas Eve News Report. I'm Louis Economopoulos. Have a Merry Christmas, and stay tuned for some Christmas cheer with Mitch Heimowitz.
Thank you, Lou. It's all that I can say. Bah humbug. Bah humbug. Now, today is the 24th. In 2 hours, it's going to be the 25th. Now, let's get things straight. My name is Mitch Heimowitz, and with a name like Heimowitz, there is not much... You think you don't like my name? You think Afrida's a more distinguished name? Thank you.
Beautiful name.
With a name like Heimowitz, you can imagine I have nothing better to be doing on a night like this. Now, with that in mind, I have instructed the entire research staff of WR